Through the chair, we are now live and should be ready to proceed. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Sarah, and the technical staff. So Brian, if you want to go ahead.
Good evening, Chair Singh, committee members, and residents of Kitchener. My name is Brian Bateman, city planner, responsible for the processing the applications being heard this evening. I'm very pleased to bring forward a planning report that is recommending approval of an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment that would allow for the redevelopment of lands municipally known as 19 to 41 Mill Street. With me this evening, and also from the city, are Sandra Bassanese, urban designer, Victoria Grown, heritage planner, and Barry Cronkite and Aaron McCormick-Jones from transportation planning. We're here to answer any questions that may arise during the course of discussions. Next. Thank you. So the subject lands are outlined in red and comprise properties municipally addressed as 19 to 41 Mill Street. These consolidated lands are approximately 106 meters of frontage onto Mill Street, with an average depth of approximately 80 meters for an area of about 0.72 hectares. And for those in Imperial, it's 1.8 acres. These it also contains 6 dwellings, as you can see from the aerial photograph. And also, as you can see, the lotting fabric is described as deep and wide and conducive for redevelopment. So the adjacent land use is described as is commercial residential along Queen Street at varying degrees of intensity, small scale commercial and open space directly across and on the opposite side of Mill Street, the Iron Horse Trail, CN Rail, and medical offices just beyond, located directly behind the subject lands, and then lower scaled residential immediately to the east. Located within a major transit station area, adjacent to the Queen Street mixed-use corridor, Victoria Park, trails, and the downtown, these lands are ideally located. They're part of a larger triangular-shaped parcel of land, as you can see from the aerial photograph, that are zoned CR1, or better known as Commercial Residential 1 in our bylaw 85-1, and designated low-rise commercial residential in the city's official plan. These are lands that have been targeted for development. The zoning, for example, has been in place for these lands since 1994. Next. Here's the conceptual plan for the subject lands. The building is a multiple dwelling with varying heights ranging from 3 to 12 stories, consisting of a base of a 3 to 4 story townhomes located along Mill Street to activate the front. Also units backing onto the Iron Horse Trail. And then there's a stepped building design. So there, if you look at the very lower left-hand corner of the concept, you'll see 12 stories. That steps down to 10 stories, that steps down to 7 stories, and then to 3 stories. It's a design that has been designed to obviously be sensitive to adjacent land uses, yet providing some density in accordance with the policies. The result is thoughtful design utilizing a very balanced approach here, one that strives to minimize impacts, achieve compatibility through design, yet yielding deep density to meet objectives of the transit station area development policies, the Victoria Park Conservation Plan, and then really at the end, helping to support the planned function of the Queen Street mixed-use corridor. Next. To implement that conceptual plan that I've just showed, firstly requires an official plan amendment from the low density commercial residential 2, high density commercial residential with a special policy that would recognize the maximum allowable height at 12 stories and a maximum floor space ratio of 3.5. This sets the policy framework for this development. Next. To implement the official plan amendment, a zoning bylaw amendment is required from CR1 to R8 with site-specific regulations. And the intent of the bylaw is simply to ensure the development concept is carried out in the form that was just shown. Next slide. So what we heard. So public engagement was carried out. We received approximately 100 letters were mailed to residents within 120 meter radius in August of 2019. We received about 27 letters and emails citing various concerns and issues, and that these were broken down into 3 broad categories. Next. And these 3 broad categories are heritage. So there was concern around obviously the loss of houses on the site, and then impacts to heritage resources adjacent to the subject property. And I've lumped sort of the loss of affordable housing stock within this one as well. Traffic and transportation. We've heard people were concerned about the increase in traffic that this may generate, and then safety concerns. And then lastly, built form and urban design, just the compatibility of the development. It was felt the proposal is too high, too dense for this neighborhood. And of course, the impacts associated with the built form. Next slide, please. So what was done? So a neighborhood information meeting was held in December of 2019. And from that meeting, a working group was formed to work through the various concerns that were just noted and to come up with design solutions and improvements. 3 working group meetings were held in the first quarter of 2020, just prior to COVID. And this resulted in the preparation of design principles. And these are included in the urban design guidelines that are attached to the planning report or to the staff report. And essentially these were to inform the site design. Key results, in our opinion, is improved building compatibility and articulation through a series of step backs, greater setbacks, all in an effort to provide a balanced approach. And then also with respect to the loss of units, Polarcorp has committed to providing affordable units and help for displaced residents. And the applicant will obviously provide more information on that in that regard. Next slide. So here's, this is a diagram showing the elevation of building design through the process. As you can see in the upper left-hand corner, that was the plan that was originally, or concept that was submitted with the application. It's a 10-story maximum height and an 8-story slab style design with the townhomes fronting onto Mill Street. That's the one that went to, that was circulated with the application, and it went to the NIM, and the concerns were cited. And then through the working group sessions and just through continuous staff review and refinement of the plan with staff in the working group, the plan to the right, or the massing diagram on the right, shows what was achieved. And really it was to improve greater compatibility. There was concern about impact on adjacent heritage resources. So this plan really responds to that by building in greater setbacks, lowering the heights, particularly to 45 Mill Street, and really redistributing that massing so that the net result is we've got massing and height really concentrated at the back portion of the property nearest the Iron Horse Trail and Queen Street, and then tapering down from there. And then the diagram underneath really shows what's been removed and added through that process. Next slide, please. So in summary, Staff is recommending approval of the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment to redevelopment the properties located at 19 to 41 Mill Street for the following. Alignment with provincial, regional, and city policy. It is in a major transit station area. These are areas where we are strategically located. It's next to a major transit station area where density is encouraged. Location is proximate to the Queen Street and fronting onto Mill. Both are arterial roadways. Will support the planned function of the Queen Street mixed-use corridor. The site has been deemed functional and serviceable. And really, in the end, the design promotes compatibility and minimizes impacts. Thank you very much, and I would be pleased to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you, Brian. And I asked the committee members hold questions of staff until we get through all the delegations. And once more, we do have 18 registered delegations. So I'll start off with the first three are the representatives of the applicant and have requested to present collaboratively one after the other. I will promote them together to give. So they have also asked to respond to questions following their three presentations together. And those are Joseph Popolo, Matthew Vorsacha, and Andrew Bousfield. That will be the three that present together. And following delegations, these three are not presenting, but are attending and are available to answer questions of committee for clarification. And that's David Butler with Butler Consulting, Urban Planner, Owen Scott, that's CHC Limited, Heritage Planner, and Julia Salvani, Salvani Consulting, Traffic Engineer. So I'll have the first three delegates that are presenting together. Again, Joseph, Matthew, and Andrew. Once more, to repeat, you have 5 minutes to make your delegation. And I would appreciate that your comments from the previous delegation not repeat themselves and your points, and try to be succinct with your comments. Thank you.
Hello, Chair, members of the committee. I come before you today on behalf of Polo Corp to support staff's recommendation for the approval of applications before you. This is our newest project at the corner of Mill and Queen Street. My name is Joseph Pupolo, and I'm the project manager on this project. And for the past 15 years, my family, including Paul, Michael, have worked together to develop this project. With the City of Kitchener, who have endorsed this application after much discussion and consultation. Next slide, please. I'd refer you to our team in attendance to which we have tonight is David Butler, our planner, Owen Scott, our heritage planner, Andrew Bousfield of ABA, who's our architect, and Julia Salvini. We had a multi-functional team working on this, including urban design, landscaping, as well as engineering. We have three delegations to walk you through today, our application. Firstly, myself, who will provide you a high-level overview. Secondly, Matthew Wurzeka will be providing feedback on what we heard from the residents. And finally, from Andrew Bousfield from ABA, who will be speaking to the design modifications based upon the feedback that we've received. Next slide, please. Polo Corp has a long history in this community, a family business, long successful projects in Kitchener and the entire region. Historically, we've successfully integrated heritage properties, namely 379 Queen Street, our headquarters, into infill projects such as Bear on Queen. We've recently completed that development with over 100 residents in the building. Next slide, please. We have a history of creating projects that integrate with heritage into our design. There's been some suggestion regarding the preservation of 19 and 25 Mill Street, and let me be clear, both properties were evaluated not to be significant enough for designation, and this was affirmed by Council in 2010. From the staff report, and I quote, Council made a decision not to list 25 Mill Street on the Municipal Heritage Register. As such, municipally addressed 19 and 25 Mill Street do not have status under the Ontario Heritage Act, close quote. We have worked diligently to protect meaningful heritage and assets in the past, and we continue this with our work with 45 Mill Street in the Victoria Heritage District. Our plan is to continue to manage heritage, adding new housing, integrating the neighborhood, and providing high quality design and landscape architecture. PoloCorp is committed to build high quality homes in the city and region and build on the infrastructure that is the ION. Next slide, please. Mill and Queen represents 180 new housing units in the core of Kitchener, within a mass transit station and within walking distance of 3 ION stops, close to parks, amenities, and has been identified by staff as an area for intensification since 1994. Next slide, please. Located within the Schneider Creek neighborhood, southwest of the downtown core. It's also located in the Queen Corridor and on the Mill Arterial Road and on the Iron Horse Trail. Next slide, please. This development features the following key attributes. Number 1, pedestrian focus. Pedestrian focus with integration to the Iron Horse Trail, including dedicated bike facility and hidden parking facilities. Point number 2, a mix of housing for first-time home buyers and downsizers from studio to 2-bedroom plus den, including townhouses fronting onto Mill Street to match the rhythm of the street. Affordable housing, we provide both affordable and attainable housing, and we will coordinate with local not-for-profit housing groups. And then finally, high quality landscaping through interfaces with the existing community, the trail, by creating community art, bee pollinator gardens to help support local bee and bird population, tiered gardens ranging from the Iron Horse Trail through articulated terrace throughout the development. Next slide, please. As we did with previous projects and recently completed, such as Bear on Queen, we have worked closely with the neighborhood and the Schneider Creek Community Association in order to establish comments and ideas for integrating this project in their community. We have met 5 times in formal meetings and many other times with many other members in the community to address thoughts and approaches to this project. We've acted in good faith at every step, and I personally made myself available to the members of the working group and others who have requested. On this basis of the feedback, we've received feedback from the community. We modified our design and integrated the feedback into this project. There were multiple compromises throughout the discussions and ultimately reflects in our commitment and respect for the Schneider Creek community neighborhood. Andrew Bousfield will walk you through those modifications shortly. However, I will be very candid. I was a little bit disheartened at some of the submissions, given that we've already addressed some of the concerns that we've already raised. But let me be very direct. On 19 Mill Street, these were not designated properties, and they were not. They were managed through a separate process in 2010. No objection was given by any of the residents or advocacy groups at that time when it wasn't when it was not listed. Planning and business decisions were made on that basis. Point number 2, we have modified setbacks to be responsive to neighbors' comments and improve sight lines. Number 3, regarding the flood fringe, the GRCA, our engineers, and city staff have reviewed the matter and have no issues with this development. Detailed engineering work has been done as part of this application. A detailed design will be addressed at the site plan stage. We have reassured 45 Mill Street and staff that we will work through them at any issues prior to this meeting. This continues to be the case. Please review pages 94 and through 96 of your package for comments from the GRCA, and they're stating they have no issues with us proceeding. Point number 4, we have a detailed plan in place to help any displaced residents, and we've communicated this plan to staff. We've also provided both affordable and attainable housing in this development. Point number 5, we have modeled our setbacks and lines and to be responsive to heritage concerns. This is supported by staff as part of our HIA. And finally, we have requested further meetings with 45 Mill Street prior to this meeting, and candidly, we have not received response. So at this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to Matthew to speak further. I'm here for any questions at the end of the presentation, and we are in support of the professional recommendations made by staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Matthew?
Good evening, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you, Joseph, for your presentation. My name is Matthew Warzeka, and I'm a project manager with Polo Corp. Next slide, please. Actually, next slide as well. Thanks. As Mr. Bateman described, we are proposing both an official plan amendment to redesignate the site as high-density commercial residential and a zoning bylaw amendment to rezone the property to residential 8 zone with site-specific provisions. Staff provided a thorough review of these applications, so I won't repeat this information. However, I will note that David Butler of Butler Consulting, who produced the updated planning justification report, is available this evening to answer any questions that the committee may have. Next slide, please. We approach the preparation of the design concept with a series of design principles in mind. Our goal is to introduce a building that recognizes its current planning context within the city by providing an opportunity where a diverse group of people can live, work, and play within close proximity to community amenities and transit options while striving for high quality urban design and architectural design throughout. Next slide, please. As Joseph described in the previous presentation, Polo Corp actively sought input from the residents of the community through 4 public consultation meetings. Ultimately, the input that we received from these meetings had a significant impact on the concept that is being presented today. Next slide, please. So what specifically did we hear at these meetings and how did it impact our design? Mr. Bateman summarized these comments into 3 categories, but I've added a 4th. The first group of comments can be associated to parking and traffic. To address these comments, we had Julia Salvini from Salvini Consulting produce a parking and traffic impact study. The parking study concluded that the proposed parking rate will satisfy the demand for parking created by new residents and that the proposed rate is in line with contemporary parking rates, while the TIS concluded that the surrounding street network will remain within acceptable service levels. In regard to heritage, leading up to tonight's meeting, we received a number of comments regarding the protection of heritage features. From the beginning of this process, Polo Corp recognized the site's proximity to adjacent heritage designated properties, as well as the Iron Horse Trail and the Victoria Park Heritage District, and certainly recognized the value of these assets within the community. In preparing the development concept, not only did we want to acknowledge the surrounding heritage features, we wanted to celebrate them as being part of the community. And we've done this in a few ways. We have provided appropriate and in some cases very significant setbacks from the adjacent homes in Iron Horse Trail. For example, the setbacks from 45 Mill Street range from 5 meters up to over 14 meters. The setbacks are complemented by significant building step backs, both of which will be further outlined in ABA's presentation following this one. We have also produced urban design guidelines that expressly acknowledge the existing character of the community and heritage features around the property by addressing building massing, building materials, and the site's landscaping. Ultimately, there is no heritage designation on the property, and the proposed development considers comments provided through the scoped HIA. If there are any questions regarding the HIA or heritage in general, staff and Owen Scott from CHC Consulting are available to answer questions this evening. Through the consultation process, we received a few comments pertaining to the existing tenants and housing affordability. The intent to redevelop these lands has been known for quite some time, and in knowing that information has been communicated to the tenants well in advance of the applications being submitted. Despite any amount of notice, we recognize that moving can be difficult for some tenants, and so we want to help mitigate those impacts. As we discussed in a letter directed to staff, Polo Corp is committing to providing a moving stipend to each of these residents impacted by the development to help with any costs associated with moving. And wherever possible, we would work with tenants to find a comparable unit within our own rental inventory. In regard to housing affordability, this is a topic that is certainly at the forefront of many people's minds, including our own. As we're all aware, the cost of single detached homes is on the rise, reaching new highs year over year. This makes home ownership and renting increasingly difficult for new households in our community. Entry-level home buyers are finding that condominiums and townhomes are attainable points of entry into home ownership, which is precisely the unit type we're providing within this project. Of course, we recognize that market rate units are not attainable for every member of our community. That's why Polo Corp is committing to working with the region and partnering with a community housing provider to include 5 designated affordable housing units within the development. Ultimately, housing affordability is an ongoing challenge and one that requires a systemic and community-oriented solution. However, The proposed development will contribute to the overall housing supply, provide a mix of housing sizes, types, and levels of affordability, and will be contributing to the total inventory of affordable housing units available in our community. The last comments I'll touch on are those related to the built form and urban design of the proposal. Many of the comments we heard pertain to setbacks, heights, and the building's total FSR. We heard that the original proposal setbacks were too close, the building too tall, and the overall massing was too imposing on the existing character of the community. I know the committee understands this, but I think it warrants repeating. All of these are ways of measuring a building, but no single measurement can be used in isolation to illustrate a building. All of these measurements work together to shape its massing and create a presence within the community. This is an idea that we spend a lot of time considering after the working group meetings. We asked ourselves, what adjustments can be made to address the comments that we received, while also providing a building that aligns with provincial, regional, and municipal planning objectives. ABA took a close look at this question and ultimately produced a concept that we think finds the appropriate balance, which they'll walk through in our next presentation. Next slide, please. With that, I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to speak with them this evening, and we'll welcome the opportunity to answer questions that they may have following our final presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. And Andrew? And once more, Andrew, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Singh. My presentation is via video. I assume, Sarah, you'll play it? Thank you. My name is Andrew Bousfield. I'm the president of ABA Architects, Inc. We are Waterloo-based, and I am the principal architect for this project. It is my privilege to speak to you about the building's massing, and particularly on its evolution since the neighborhood information meeting held on December 4th, 2019, and 3 working group sessions held on January 15th, February 4th, and March 4th, 2020. This design outcome comes as a result of refinement in response to comments of staff and the public. At the time of the neighborhood information meeting, the design concept presented was for an 8 and 10-story slab-style building, along with 3-story stacked townhouse-style units fronting Mill Street and the Iron Horse Trail, wrapping the above-ground parking structure. We heard that it was too imposing and not suitable for its context. The result of the last year's architectural journey is the building design for presentation today, and it comprises carefully articulated and terraced building design with a maximum height of 12 stories and 180 residential units, as well as structured indoor parking for all residents. 5 of the residential units are to be affordable units. An above-ground parking structure is wrapped or screened by dwelling units in the form of stacked townhouses facing Mill Street and the Iron Horse Trail. The significant design refinements can generally be described as designing a building with greater setbacks at its perimeter, such as by providing a minimum 10.5 meter interior side yard setback on the west side of the property and a minimum 5.4 meter interior side yard adjacent 45 Mill Street. The other big move was incorporating increased and additional step backs and terracing into the building's articulation of massing on all sides of the development. Notice that the building will incorporate step backs up and away from 45 Mill Street in order to create a transition in height and break up the massing of the building. Floors 4 to 7 step back a minimum of 7 meters from the eastern building face. Floors 8 to 10 step back a minimum of 25 meters from the eastern building face, and floors 11 and 12 will step back a minimum of 57 meters from the eastern building face. These building step backs create terraces, which are utilized as common amenity areas and private terraces to increase active outdoor spaces for the project. The proposed tower will create a new feature on the city's skyline and is articulated with varying heights, which will create visual interest from several different vantage points. This is a key component of the city's tall building guidelines. The proposed building has been oriented so that most units will have views and windows towards Mill Street and the Iron Horse Trail, and also towards Queen Street South. Effort has been made to orient buildings to protect privacy by setting the tower back and away as much as possible from adjacent dwellings. Visual screening, such as landscaping and fencing, will be installed where drive aisles are adjacent to low-rise residential uses and public spaces. The building lobby fronts onto Mill Street near Queen Street South. The service and loading areas are proposed to be located on the west side of the property next to the parking lots of the adjacent buildings fronting onto Queen Street. The driveway access to the parking structure has been moved away from 45 Mill Street and now located nearer to Queen Street South. By relocating this access to a more central location to the west means that residential uses can now be positioned adjacent to the existing home. This allows for a direct social and visual connection between the new and existing dwellings. It also facilitates a more compatible introduction of the development into the community. The building continues to maintain the low-rise height along the Mill Street frontage with stacked townhouse-style units with porches and pedestrian sidewalk connections. Ground floor units are also proposed to incorporate patios overlooking the trail. These units will help to animate both the street and the trail. Notice that the ground floor units along Mill Street are aligned at an angle to the street in order to maintain the established rhythm and orientation of the neighboring houses along Mill Street. Also note that the massing of these street-facing townhomes has been simplified as a result of community input. The townhouse units on the south side of the building, fronting the Iron Horse Trail, offer a unique opportunity to create an active and landscaped building edge, while also improving safety along this corridor through the use of lighting and increased visibility. Mill Street is currently characterized by older brick homes. Through the public consultation process, it was clear that maintaining a similar character in our design was an important consideration. A building that is influenced by the character of the street can better be integrated into the existing streetscape. So, in addition to the changes in building massing, a mix of sympathetic building materials and substantial terracing will make the building more compatible with the surrounding uses and will allow for the character of the community to be better maintained at the building's interfaces with adjacent uses. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. I trust that it has given you a better understanding of our building's design evolution since the Neighborhood Information Meeting of December 4th, 2019. And I sincerely hope that you see it as I do, as an exemplar of a successful collaboration and communication between a developer and the community, and with a better outcome for all concerned. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Singh. That concludes my presentation this evening.
All right. Thank you, Joseph, Matthew, and Andrew. See if the committee has any questions of you three. I see that there are none. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So on to our other delegates. Next up is Alexandra Petrovich. Again, you have 5 minutes to make your presentation. Alexandra? Okay. I'm assuming that Ms. Petrovich is not.
Through the chair, just one moment, please.
Okay.
I assume you can hear me now?
Oh, I hear you now, Alexandra. How are you?
Thank you so much, Chair Singh, members of the council. Well, the conversation this evening may seem to mostly revolve around technical issues, land use, official plan, density designation, but actually it's always about the people, the human condition and relationships with each other and the places we live in. So my understanding through the work of the Social Development Center is the consensus was not reached in the process and through the working group with some of the residents. So it's our role as stewards of the urban life and good planning to always make sure that we asked all the right questions in order to potentially come closer or reach a consensus. And the housing strategy approved in December 2020 opens up with a focus on human rights and respectful lived experience of the citizens, regardless of their socioeconomic status or identities. And housing need assessment done by staff, which was the foundation of the housing strategy, states that we need over 14,000 affordable housing units in Kitchener. It's a high demand for low and moderate income residents, while there is surplus supply for market rental, market ownership units that would not match the current need of the local residents. And I think that is important, investment aside, right? And there are different ways to look at supply and demand. Greater supply does not automatically, in the current economic context, bring down the rents or prices of housing. In the current context, this common phrase about regulation of prices to supply hasn't been applicable for a long time in the globalized and speculative financial and housing markets we live in. And we have thousands of underserved residents and no glimmer of hope that current developments and projected growth would have positive impact on affordability. Citizens know that through their lived experience, and developers know that too. They would, of course, be seeking highest prices that market can bear, and we heard that through inclusionary zoning planning process. So we will remain vigilant about the ways in which we're contributing to making the city livable for local residents. So social development centers ongoing study maps displacement and loss of affordable housing in the core areas. We identified so far 120 locations replaced or renovated to make way for market rental housing to the greatest extent. And this isn't enough affordable housing being built. We know that. So did we miss some of the important questions in this situation where to our understanding, 12 households would be displaced, and we will have 5 affordable units, which is less than 3% of all the units in the new build. Affordability, the crucial piece in this case, is not defined. It remains an elusive concept, and we need to be more specific and ask for clarity on the commitments made. For example, what would be the period for which those units would remain affordable, and so on. And the 12 households that would have to move, not by choice and not with much of a choice, but according to availability that matches their incomes, the question is strong there, will they even remain in the city? The commitment from the developer can be far more specific regarding supports to displaced tenants. Mentioned this evening is a moving stipend, but also the offering units in the existing inventory. Important piece is units at the same price of equal value, right? Will there be a financial compensation based on the length of tenancy or formal right of first refusal for those who wish to return? So there are a lot of good examples what supports for displaced tenants would mean, and we hope that the planning of the relocation supports through the housing strategy also will enhance the cooperation with the developer in this case and developers in the future and the residents. In that regard, with not enough clarity about those deeply human issues we're dealing with, the project should not move forward until these questions, in addition to others to be asked, are answered to the satisfaction of the current tenants to be displaced, the neighborhood, the council, and the broader community. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Petrovich. I have a question from Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, just a quick question. Alex, thank you for coming in. What to you would be an acceptable level of affordability in this case?
In this case, it would have to match what people can pay, which was calculated by work of the subcommittee through the work in the housing strategy process. At this point, 1 bedroom, right? We know people cannot pay more than 700 or so it is also important once we move into the closer to occupancy, right? Because rents are increasing rapidly in Kitchener. 20% during pandemic is alarming, absolutely. So we will have to look really what affordability would mean at the time of occupancy as well.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks for coming in.
Okay. Alexandra, thank you once more. Next, we have Sally Guns. Welcome, Sally. Again, you have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm here on behalf of Cedar Hills, which is an adjoining or a neighbor to this community. And I'm coming, actually, interestingly enough, out of a meeting, because of a meeting that was held by your committee in October 2019, where zoning proposals were reviewed and presented. And at that stage, I spoke on behalf of our community in support of those zoning, but I had a special plea. And that plea was, when that zoning is approved, would you please also ensure that whatever is approved is defended by the city? In other words, we have all kinds of zoning that gets introduced, but unless it is actually enforced, it has little benefit. And that leads me to why I'm here today, because very clearly what is before you is a project that exceeds existing and proposed zoning for this neighborhood. It's obviously being a request for it to be changed, which is the source of an awful lot of frustration that communities work very hard to devise zoning with city staff and with yourselves, and subsequently developers or whomever come along and ask for a request for change. And I point out that the changes here are not insignificant.
Sally, I think your connection's frozen.
Has any innate right to a variation to existing zoning. Certainly, we all have economic interests, and the developers have economic interests, but no one's economic interests in their property exceed anyone else's. So the critical thing, I think, that is before you is to understand that when a request is made for a change to zoning to meet the interests of one party, namely the developer, what is very important is that that does not proceed, particularly in a situation where zoning has only recently been debated and set for a community, or it hasn't even been approved, the final zoning, that the community itself is satisfied that this project does not violate their interests in any way. So that is the critical thing to ask of you. And I want to actually give you an example, because the power of your committee and your council is extraordinary in this regard. And the example I want to give is an example from my community of Cedar Hills, where council did something that was so beneficial. I always think of it as the most important move that was made in the defense of Cedar Hill and the protection of Cedar Hill. And this goes back to the 1980s, when a London developer presented a proposal that would have put a huge tower block on properties on St. George Street, which is a very narrow little street. And at that time, actually, there was no reason why they couldn't do it by zoning. It was a legitimate use of the land, but it would have been devastating for the community. It would have completely changed the whole area. We presented, I think it was the first time I'd ever been before your committee, and we presented a case that was not the sort of traffic type case that you hear, but it was really explaining the impact on the community, and the developer talked, etc. And when all of this was done, I'll never forget this. Councillor Don Travers, who some of you may know, some of you won't, but he was someone who was conservative, a real estate lawyer, and someone I would have automatically thought would support a developer. He sat back in his seat and he said, "This project is wrong. I will not support it. Let them sue us." The result is being through several steps, a magnificent low-cost housing project that was built late 80s, early 90s, and to this day is a really important part of our community, not 5 units. I'm not suggesting, I mean, there's a difference here because in that case, they had to go against, there was no right for us to say. There are clear zoning rules that have to be changed in order for this process to proceed. So far, they've made some changes, but clearly the community here is not satisfied. I urge you to consider delaying this until a greater consensus. Blunt reason. Every one of you in your communities is going to be faced with exactly the same issue as we faced tonight. Mill Street is the context here, but you will be faced with developments that can only proceed provided changes are made to carefully prepared zoning requirements. You are the only people who can put a stop to those developments until everyone is satisfied, or as much as everyone as you could possibly achieve, that this is the very best project. This is a huge development we are talking about, and there are a lot of people who are not satisfied yet that that is done, and this violates existing zoning. So I call upon you, it's a hard decision, I understand, for you to make. But in our case, when council made the decision on the Lost Sea project, the impact was immense for our community and very positive. And this time it could be as well. So I urge you to take that.
I've gone over your
I finished.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I gave you extra time. I gave you 2 minutes extra.
Yeah.
Councillor Chapman, you have a question?
Yeah, just very quickly. I won't ask a question because you seem to be having technical difficulties, Sally. But thank you so much for highlight. Yeah, I mean, you keep cutting out, but thanks for giving us this example on St. George Street. I was unaware of it, and that was very useful. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Sally. Appreciate your time. Next up, we have Gail Poole. And Gail's from the Architectural Conservatory of Ontario for the North Waterloo branch.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the slides. Good evening, Mayor and Councillor. My name is Gail Poole, and I'm representing over 100 members of the Architectural Conservancy of Ontario North Waterloo Region branch. Our branch is opposed to the development. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear, Gail.
Okay, thank you. Our branch is opposed to the proposed demolition of 19 and 25 Mill Street because they have significant heritage value. Slide, please. Slide. These are the features on 25 Mill Street. Slide. These are the features on 19 Mill Street. Why were 19 and 25 Mill Street not added to the Heritage Registry? In 2010, the city's heritage staff proposed that these properties be put on the registry, but council accepted the argument of Paul Puoplo Polycorp, who said that he had plans for the property. An owner's plans for a property does not change its heritage value. First of all, determining the heritage value was conducted by staff following provincial regulation 0906. Slide. You can see from the slide and the phrases in red that 25 Mill Street meet all of the attributes of a heritage property. 19 Mill Street has both design and contextual value. Slide, please. What does not affect heritage value? the condition of the property, the future development potential, whether redevelopment is in the best interest of the city's mixed-use corridor study, growth management plan, or proximity to transit. Please note point 2, future development does not affect heritage value. We realize that council, after consultation with heritage staff, makes the final decision on whether a property is given heritage status, yet staff's recommendation were not accepted for 19 and 25 Mill Street. This was done despite the policies developed by all 3 levels of government. Slide. The city's official plan shows that a property does not have to be listed or designated to be considered as having cultural value or interest. Slide. The regional official plan requires that cultural heritage resources are conserved by municipalities. Note the italics in this phrase are in the original. Slide, please. Third, at the provincial level, and this is a good deal to take in, but there are provisions in the Planning Act, the provincial policy statement, and places to grow where cultural heritage resources shall be conserved. We asked, why were these laws and policies not followed? Because council did not list these properties, only a scoped or limited study was required from the developer. Slide, please. Missing from a scoped study are a site history, description of the buildings, a statement of the cultural heritage value, documentation, whatever that is, most important, proposed alterations and demolitions must be justified. Because council had not listed these properties, staff reported that 19 and 25 had no heritage status, even though anyone walking by them can see that they are heritage homes. The September 2020 Heritage Impact Assessment does not even evaluate 19 and 25 Mill as significant heritage properties affected by the development. It is as if 19 and 25 Mill Street do not exist. We asked, is there something you can do about this situation? The ACO strongly recommends against demolition. If we continue to demolish buildings because of some quirk in the process, then Kitchener cannot live up to its obligations to protect heritage. As stated in the provincial policy statement, significant built heritage shall be conserved. Slide, please. Conserved means the identification, protection, management, and use of built heritage resources. It does not mean demolition. To reiterate, ACO believes that 19 and 25 Mill Street were not considered heritage properties because of a flawed process. Secondly, this project is being proposed in an established neighborhood squeezed between Victoria Park Heritage Conservation District, the Iron Horse Trail, and a Part 4 heritage property. It does not fit here. 2 important heritage properties would be demolished and our city would be the worse for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Poole. You were right on 5 minutes, so I appreciate that. Question from Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Gail, for coming in with your thoughtful comments. I guess my question to you would be, given your expertise in heritage, how you talk about the process, how would you have liked to see, like when it comes to heritage buildings, in what ways could heritage maybe be approached differently, or yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think that we need to have much more consideration for heritage. We have talked to Heritage Kitchener and Council about these 2 properties. It seems as if, despite comments by many members of Council that they would like to see heritage, other things get in the way. We're going to destroy, if this proposal goes through, 2 properties that are over 130 years old. Is it right? No. Is the process flawed? Yes. We would like to see a revision of the way heritage properties are handled by the city, because anyone can come along and ask for a building to be demolished. We're facing a loss of community. Our neighborhoods could become broken up by towers. We want planning staff to ensure that we continue to have a community to live in and not just accommodate any development that comes along. We need to have much more serious consideration and balance. The balance isn't there. The balance is in favor of development. We need to have communities. We need to have neighborhoods. We need to have facilities that can be enjoyed by all residents of Kitchener.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Once more, thank you, Mr. Poole. Appreciate your comments. Next is Gwen Wheeler.
Oh, hello. It's
Hi,
Gwen.
Gwen. Yes, we can hear you.
I submitted a written response. I wasn't prepared to speak at this time.
Okay, that's great. We did take note that there were various written submissions received, and council did receive them. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, appreciate your time. Next up is Jane Peller.
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to see everyone. My name is Jane Peller, and I'm a member of the Schneider Creek community. I live at 16 Martin Street. I was also a part of the working group for this project. I would like to take just a moment to thank Polacorp and the city planners for their time, their consideration, their willingness to listen, and their willingness to be patient on difficult conversations. These working groups are great ways to work together, planners, developers, and community, to produce developments that hopefully contribute positively to neighborhoods. And even if those groups end up not agreeing on some elements, they certainly can make significant changes. And the combined efforts often achieve better designs that helps meet some of our collective goals. This working group, as you heard, met about 3 times, and then we were abruptly concluded because of COVID. So this left the group feeling like we were not yet finished, that we had still matters to discuss. So this current iteration, this drawing, we have not seen it complete. We would have liked to have seen it drawn with their balconies, the windows, the roof line, the porches, the terrace treatments, and so on, to determine how this building complements the character of the existing homes and how it impacts the surrounding community. We've only seen those blocks that you've seen tonight, and so it would have been helpful to have a complete rendering of the development. The working group was never given a proposal that actually fits the current zoning of 6 stories. What we received was a footprint that in fact was 8 stories, which is in keeping with the Crosby plan. The overall scale of this development certainly exceeded the expectations of the group, and it continues to be a matter of concern. And please don't sweep this under the rug by thinking that we're just all against high buildings and that we're just against any changes. It's really not about that. This working group was committed to actually working on a design that would be sympathetic to the surrounding homes, keeping its character and contributing to that character. And we know that the building design is in fact being driven by this parking garage. And so it set up a situation where Polacorp was needing to replace that lost unit space. So from the community perspective, of course, this, we often hear why, if you choose to develop on a challenging site and you're asked to provide with good design, we think you still need to do it within the allotted zoning. And we get that a developer has the right to ask for a zone change, and that request will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. But to the community, this is a bit of a PR issue. We see a zoning of 6 stories currently. We're looking at 8 stories coming down the pike, and suddenly we end up with a portion of this development at 12 stories. Now, in the working group, we in fact understand that there are nuances to this working group. So for every gain that the community made in terms of lowering that building to be sympathetic to the adjacent properties by reducing that mass around the edges, and with the use of step backs and the use of setbacks, we were able to provide more of a buffer to the existing homes. But then we needed to give back that lost space to the development. And this is why we ended up with a portion of that development at 12 stories. That is the real issue for the community, I suppose, because it looks as though, once again, the zoning was not paid attention to. And in fact, it's more complicated than that, I guess. But by shifting the mass around, we never gained a smaller footprint on this development. And then on the other hand, by shifting the mass, we were able to achieve some better design. But at this point, I would like to say that I am in favor of the changes we made within the footprint we were given. Now, that isn't the ideal footprint for us, but I do stand by those changes. However, I still feel that the overall scale of this development is not in keeping with the character of this development or this neighborhood. And it certainly impacts the way we experience this community. I would like to see a better rendering of this drawing at this time. And so I would ask that you put off your decision tonight. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Jane. There is a few questions. Mayor Ravinovic.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Jane, for coming in this evening. I remember the last time around when we were dealing with the proposal for Barrack Castle, or the replacement of the Barrack Castle development. You were there as a advocate from the neighborhood and someone who was very engaged in that process. And I remember you speaking and saying, that this, in your mind, was sort of a perfect collaboration between a neighborhood and a developer, and how everything came about. Obviously, tonight you're asking that we hold off on approving the application, but I'm just wondering, what would it take in your mind to get from, where things are at today to the kind of comments you articulated last time around?
Well, I think that we got to get that FSR down a little bit. So even if we were able to achieve a few stories less on this overall tower, I think that the working group would be interested in seeing that. And I think that maybe there may be some other, if we reduce that overall footprint, there may be more of a buffering between the existing houses and this new development. So for me, just scaling it down a little bit may be an appropriate response, because I think the things we did with the tools we used were good ones. It's just that we still have a very large development in contrast with the surrounding communities.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, that was one of my questions as well. And Jane, thank you so much for coming in. You mentioned a deferral or a delay. Mm-hmm. What do you think would an adequate time for such a delay would be?
Well, I'm wondering how long it would take for them to answer all the questions that they're going to hear tonight. And I mean, I certainly see within a couple of weeks, if Polacorp is able to put something together for us to look at, I think that would be great. I don't know what their time frame would be. I am open to their suggestion on that if they are willing to let us know their time frame, because I don't know how complicated it is to do these things.
Yeah, I just wanted sort of an idea of, given the concerns that you've mentioned. But thank you again for coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Those are all the questions for you, Jane. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Presenting. Next up is Stefan Netcho. Stefan? welcome. Once more, you have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and the council. Like the woman before said, I'm not 100% prepared for this because I thought it would be only a written comment from me. But I wrote some quick notes down. And yeah, I'm an architect and sustainability consultant from Germany, living here in Canada. And I'm here to support the point of the ACO. I appreciate the time from the developer and the architects that was put into the project and reacting to the feedback of the community and all the people that were thinking about the project. But I have some major points that I want to bring out to you. First of all, there was so much heritage buildings, so many heritage buildings in Kitchener or Tri-City area has been lost. For example, behind you, Paul, the tower from the old town hall has been demolished, and luckily people from the community saved it and kept it, so it could later be reused for the Victoria Park. And I think we as a community, the people that living here, we have to embrace the heritage buildings. What's the past, and not just wiping it all out with new developments. Especially in this case, you have actually no idea what the design will be. The only thing that you're seeing is a volume for calculation to see if the project is feasible and good for the developer. That's basically the point. The other point is, if you take a look at the property, you just see the footprint, the overall footprint of the building is, I would say, roughly around 90%. So there's no real urban planning involved. There's no outside for the people living in this building. You have to imagine that I think it was 180 units. So it's at least 180 people living there, want to go out, want to see the sun, want to see the neighbors, and there's no room for that on this property. They have to commute or go out for a walk, and yeah, that's one problem that I'm seeing, and especially the urban planning. It's not there. It's completely ignoring, from my point of view, the environment around it. For example, you have on the one side of the project, I would say the poor people that are living there because they get a wall built in front of them between 40 or 60 meters height. So imagine you were sitting in your backyard and you see this project will be developed and erect, and yeah, you're looking at a 60 or let's say 50 meters high building. And before that, you had the heritage buildings, the nice fitting environment, and the buildings that are in the right scale and size. You had trees, you had a real community. And now you have just this big block with, okay, it had step backs, and it has it has a kind of shape, but yeah. Sorry, I'm quite a bit nervous because I wasn't prepared for this. So
You got nothing to be
please
nervous
excuse
about.
me for that. Yeah.
I'm here to listen.
Yeah, and please imagine you would be in Victoria Park, which is a absolutely gorgeous park with a old heritage buildings around it. And even now, when you're in Victoria Park, you see these heritage buildings along Victoria Park, and then you have these high-rising condo buildings with mixed design, or from mediocre to good design, maybe coming soon, hopefully. There are quite good examples in Kitchener or Tri-City area. For example, the Seagram Distillery projects and the Google projects, really nice projects that respect the heritage, but also strive into the future. So I think we can do better. And you all have the power, like the people before me said. You can make the change happen, and not just building high condos and major projects that are only for condominiums and residential, but don't commit to the community or the urban planning and the growth of the city. Okay.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thanks.
There is a question of you, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stefan, for coming in and giving us your thoughts. What would your biggest ask be?
My biggest what?
Ask. Like if you were to say to the developer, can you just at least change this? What would that be?
I would change the overall footprint, because if you take a look at the pictures where you see the surrounding buildings, it's just a humongous building. It's way too big. Of course, it has to have a decent size so that it's profitable, and that's actually the reason behind the design. But yeah, it's just too big. It's not fitting into the urban environment, and yeah, that's
Great.
my answer.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks
Yeah,
for
you're
coming.
welcome.
Thank you for speaking, Stefan.
Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate your time. Next, we have Peter Elgin. Welcome, Peter. We're about halfway in with the delegations. As I had previously, let's be mindful of the comments already made and avoid repeating the same comments. We appreciate your time. You have 5 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor Verabanovic, councillors, members of staff and participating residents of Kitchener, especially those from Mill Street. My name is Peter Eglin. Full disclosure, I'm the husband of Councillor Debbie Chapman. The following opinions are mine and should not be attributed to Councillor Chapman. I live on Strange Street in Cherry Park and speak as a concerned citizen of the City of Kitchener. The following opinions are mine. Sorry, what follows is an abbreviated version of my written submission to the committee. Polo Corp wants to develop a housing project on Mill Street that would have a floor space ratio of 3.5 on a piece of land that is currently zoned for a maximum FSR of 1. That is to say, they want to build a structure that is 2.5 times bigger than what the city in its wisdom has legislated. This desire to break the law to this degree, 2.5 times, is the single aspect of this case on which my remarks bear. I leave it to others to consider all other aspects of this proposal, and in the end, I defer to the desires of the Mill Street residents themselves. The question I want to ask councillors to address is this: what does a law-breaking request like the Pupelos signify? I'm deliberately casting the question in general terms that go beyond just this case. Here's my answer. The Pupelos of Polo Corp are a successful family of business people of long standing who must figure they have every reason to expect that any development proposal they bring forward will be accepted, with perhaps minor modifications. When one compares, for example, the original Barra Castle with the building they replaced it with on Queen Street, one can only conclude that they must think that anything is possible. Why would they think this? Why would any developer think this? It begins with money, the piles of money needed to buy the land in the first place. This point is fundamental, and I'll return to it at the end. Point one then, the developer can expect their wishes to be granted because they are rich in money, having lined up the money from investors, and the money rules. The developer then consults the official plan, the zoning bylaw, and related rules and guidelines to see what's possible on the land they own. However, point two, the developer can expect their wishes to be granted because they likely had a role in establishing the laws and rules in the first place. I don't know if that's true in this case. But if, despite point two, the laws and rules restrict what they'd like for a particular project, they can appeal them to the relevant legal tribunal and thereby tie up the offending laws for years. The legal costs are not a problem for them because of point one. Point three then, the developer can expect their wishes to be granted because they've either put the rules that offend them under appeal and therefore made them inoperable, or the threat of making them so suffices to deter opposition, given all the cost involved in fighting the appeal. The developer then brings the proposal to the city planning department, then to the council's planning committee, and then to council itself. Affected residents may be consulted. All institutional parties want development. The developer, obviously, the city too, in order to grow in size, population density, tax base, and future amenities. And some council members are likely to be developers already. Point four then, the developer can expect their wishes to be granted because their interests largely align with those of the staff, the mayor, and a majority of councillors. But let's say affected residents are opposed to a particular development, organize themselves as a group, get the councillor on side, and win over the other members of council, which then rejects the proposal. What then? The developer can appeal the decision to the local planning appeal tribunal, the LPAT, where all the cards are stacked in their favor. They have ready access to the professional expertise, the high-level legal representation, and the stacks of money required to play those cards. The residents don't. Point five then, the developer can expect their wishes to be granted because they have the resources of money and expertise to mount a successful appeal of any rejection, and the other parties know it. But let's say the developer decides against using the LPAT and goes instead to the Committee of Adjustment to get a minor variance, as it's called. When Vive's plan to demolish 2 heritage homes on Queen Street was successfully opposed, Vive got the Committee of Adjustment to increase the height of their desired new build from 8 stories to 10. The 25% increase in height was regarded as a minor variance. The Pupelos are surely aware of such precedents. Point 6 then, the developer can expect their wishes to be granted because the Committee of Adjustment has proven willing to accommodate developers' desires. Suffice it to say in conclusion, that what I have said here is simply a specifying of what the Mayor said on 25th of June 2018, summing up the feeling of Council as it prepared to approve Perimeter's BB3 proposal. Quoting the record, although many councillors sympathise with residents' frustrations, Council needs to consider the message it is sending to investors, said the Mayor. In other words, we must obey the money, recall point 1. Until the people of Kitchener and their elected representatives, that's you lot councillors, adopt instead the democratic principle that although many councillors sympathise with developers' frustrations, Council needs to consider the message it is sending to the residents who elected them. Until that day, the hubris of the plutocrats will continue to tear apart the fabric of society, and the common people, the demos, will continue to be left out and left behind. Let me finish by commending the residents of Mill Street for standing up and demanding that their interests in this proposed development be respected. All power to you, citizens.
Paul, you're muted.
I'm sorry, didn't realize. Peter, there are no questions of you. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Next delegate is Kevin White for Water Region, Yes in My Backyard.
Good evening. Before I commence, can I confirm that I am audible?
Yes, we can hear you, Kevin. Thank you for joining us. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Tonight I am presenting on behalf of WR YIMBY, Waterloo Region Yes in My Backyard, an organization that strives to welcome more neighbors into our community by saying yes to more housing. The proposed construction certainly has appealing qualities, not the least of which is the creation of affordable housing units, as there is demand for thousands of such units in the region. There are also associated benefits of creating a more environmentally responsible city in terms of density that surely weigh in the decision to proceed with such a plan. WR YIMBY is pleased to support endeavors that increase the supply of housing. The greater the availability of housing, the more people that can be housed, and the more downward pressure we are likely to put on the overall cost of housing, not to mention corollary benefits such as helping to create a more walkable city and so on. However, there are concerns beyond simply supporting a project because it increases the supply of housing. We believe that the issues of tenant and resident displacement require respect, dignity, and justice. This cannot be done unilaterally and must be a solution that satisfies those being displaced as much as possible, and therefore requires community input and resources from the various parties involved to determine an appropriate procedure. Maintaining a precedent that fails to properly protect the interests and well-being of our communities puts others at risk when engaging in similar projects in the future. It would be prescient then to begin setting examples for how we could enact such projects with more positive outcomes, particularly for both current and prospective residents. Surely the goodwill that would come from a process that resulted in a just outcome for all parties would encourage future projects that may lead to substantial benefit for our rapidly growing communities in the region. It is our opinion then that it would be very beneficial for a discussion about what that solution looks like to happen if this plan is to proceed. With that said, the current tools the city has at their disposal are not necessarily well suited to achieving this result. Preventing this development may or may not ultimately prevent this displacement, and a worst case scenario would be a compromise that does not address or prevent the displacement and limits the amount of housing in this development. Unfortunately, this is the type of compromise we sometimes see in such cases, and it is the sort of compromise one might expect to find when the zoning tools we have are often designed to limit housing density and not to ensure affordability and housing stability. We see the high demand for housing for people living in Kitchener, particularly in the downtown, combined with the lack of an adequate supply of housing to meet that demand and the lack of current policy tools directed specifically to the protection of rental housing and prevention of displacement as key contributors to the problems of displacement and the lack of housing affordability in Kitchener. Zoning for lower housing density is more likely to contribute to this problem than to solve it because it limits our ability to address our high housing demand. However, this does not change the fact that an individual development such as this can involve displacement, which we would not like to see. This is why we still very much emphasize the importance of meeting the current tenants' needs as they see fit. I believe we can all recognize the need for an increased amount of housing in the region, and therefore there is a common goal to work toward making the first steps to finding such a solution possible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Question from Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, Kevin, thank you for coming in. My question is, what would, you talk about appropriate process and meeting current tenant needs. What would that look like for you? Like what are the current needs and how would they be met, and or what would an appropriate process be?
I think that would have to come from the tenants being displaced. I could not speak for them in what that would be. There are hypothetical scenarios that I could propose, but I don't know that that would actually be addressing the needs in this circumstance, and I suspect it would change from development to development.
Okay, good. Thank you for that response. Thank you for coming in.
All right. So thank you. Next, we have Deb Westman.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Thank you, Deb. We hear you loud and clear. You have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and good evening, everyone. As you know, my name is Deb Westman. I live at 45 Mill Street, and I was or am part of the working group as well. And I would like to say also that we do appreciate that process. I feel like we accomplished a lot working through that and got to a what we thought was a good point. And certainly Polo Corp has made good strides to try and reshape the building and through setbacks and step backs, moving the driveway away from our heritage house. And so I think it's been a struggle for us to also, through appreciating that, but looking at the context of the building, which is really, I think, what the problem is. And certainly we've heard from many neighbors in the community and people that certainly haven't understood what was presented in the package because there's just little information available. So I understand where some of the issues are. And I think we were stopped, as Jane mentioned, last March with COVID, and that's nobody's fault, but none of the consultations were reinstated. So our concern now is that a year later, probably the big issue, which we had addressed or brought up at the time, has never really been addressed. And that is that it's the huge size and scale of the development in a low-rise and historic residential neighborhood. It was never on the table to consider the current zoning or even the proposed secondary plan zoning. And I find that frustrating, and we've been told that because of the floodplain issues on the site that the parking can't go below ground, so it needs to be above ground. So there's 3 stories of it, which is basically a big wall and whatnot. And we understand that, and Polo Corp is working on designs to reshape and articulate that, but it just doesn't seem right that that is used as leverage to increase the size of the building and the height and whatnot. As I said, we appreciate what's been done in our house. It's shifted the building to the back, and it's very, we feel that there's not, or I feel there's not sufficient transitions to other parts of the areas around it. So the site has 4 heritage designations actually all around it, between the Iron Horse Trail, the Victoria Park Heritage Conservation District, the Schneider Creek and the Cedar Hill Cultural Heritage Landscape, as well as 45 Mill Street. And it's not just those pieces in itself, but this is a low-rise heritage neighborhood, as I said. And so it just seems to dwarf everything, regardless of some of the changes that have been made. So as you hear tonight, the working group members are not in support of the proposed amendments that will allow development of the size and scale, and more information, dialogue, and design work are needed to find a more compatible solution for the neighborhood community. I've provided a list of items that would be helpful for us to be able to understand it and the community understand it better, which we've talked about, but it's not just, a rendering, it's about views from all the different locations, from all the heritage aspects around it. The heritage is what makes up the character of this neighborhood, and so we would like to see some of that. Thank you very much for your consideration, and again, we appreciate this.
Thank you, Deb. There's a question from Councillor Chapman for you.
Yeah, Deb, thanks for coming in and talking to us. And as you mentioned, you live in 45 Mill Street, which itself is a heritage home. What's your biggest concern with the development beside your house of what's being proposed right now?
Well, initially, of course, it's the disruption to our neighborhood, displacement of our neighbors who will be moving and having to find other places to live, and many don't at this point. I was hoping some of them would be able to speak to Alexandra as she was conducting some of the survey and feedback information, but unfortunately that hasn't worked out. There's unique people here, there's unique buildings, and the development is just considerably larger than, well, it's just a complete replacement. So we have to look at it in a different context. And as I said, size probably is the most part. Most of the issues, it dwarfs the neighborhood and creates shadows, which are not actually in this particular document as well. They're included in the Heritage Impact Statement or Heritage Impact Assessment. So there's just bits of information that would be better to, well, would be nice to have out front a bit more. And I would, sorry, just to get your question, I would say probably it's a size at this point.
Okay. Thanks a lot for coming in, and thanks for your comments and for
Thank
your
you.
written submission as well.
Thank you. There's another question from Councillor Gazzola. Oh, I'm sorry. Councillor Marsh actually clicked in first. So Councillor Marsh and then Councillor Gazzola.
Hi, Deb. Thanks for bringing your thoughts to us today. I want to know, as one of the neighbors that's most impacted by this development, you're saying that, in answer to Councillor Chapman's question, that size is your biggest issue. Are you talking about the footprint itself or the height? Like,
it's both. The building has been pulled back away from our property, which is great. There's still a huge footprint on the site, and I think it's most heavy in the side that faces Queen Street, and the two houses, the neighboring houses. There are still two houses there, and neighbors who are not happy with this because they're left in more shadow and left right against the highest parts of the building. I know there's not much concern, or apparently, for the residences, the buildings that are along Queen Street, because they're commercial. But it still isolates the homes at the other end of the street.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola, go ahead. Councillor Gazzola.
I unmuted myself, but somebody else must have muted me. Anyhow, Ms. Westman, you were on the working group for this project, so you're obviously very familiar with the project. Do you feel that if it were deferred, that some changes can be accomplished?
I do think so. As I said, we've worked through, we're committed. The working group's been working hard. Everybody's been working hard. City staff, Polo Corp, of course. It's just that what was most important, or one of the biggest issues for us, never got addressed and was never on the table. So yes, I mean, in light of coming up with a compromise, I think changes can be made to work things out.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. Thank you for presenting. Next up is John Ryrie.
Oh, can you hear me at this point?
Yes, John, we can hear you, and welcome. You have 5 minutes to make your presentation, and I'll continue to remind delegates just to be mindful of the points already made from previous delegations, and try to refrain from repeating. Thank you.
Yes, I'll do my best. Chair and members of the committee, as indicated, my name is John Ryrie. I've lived in the Central Frederick neighborhood for 41 years. And at one point I worked on the secondary plan for Central Frederick. What I object to in the staff report is the leap from low-rise commercial residential with a maximum FSR of 1.0 to high-rise commercial residential with an FSR of 3.5. As has already been pointed out, that's a 250% increase. That's 3.5 times the existing FSR, which of course explains why the building is enormous, 180 units and 12 stories high. All of the setbacks and terracing in the world do not change that fact, as was indicated earlier by someone who commented on the footprint. Nowhere in the document is it clear why city staff have not recommended a shift to medium density and a building considerably smaller in size with less need for parking and less impact than all of the parameters cited in the report and commented on extensively tonight. I read nothing in the report that strongly supports the existing neighborhood. Virtually all of the analysis focuses on having higher density, efficient use of land, proximity to transit, active transportation networks, none of which speak to whether this massive project complements the pervasive existing residential and low density heritage character of Middle Cortland. Here, to my mind, is the key sentence in the report, page 1-7. Quote, staff recommend adding a special policy area to limit the maximum height to 12 stories and maximum floor space ratio to 3.5 to better align the policy with the development proposal. To better align the policy with the development proposal, not to align the policy with the secondary plan or the neighborhood's character or the land use of residents and homeowners nearby, just benefit the proposal. That sums up the core problem with the entire application. It's self-serving. And the phrase that was used to limit the height again is highly revealing. The report ought to be emphasizing its recommendation to extend and dramatically increase the height well beyond what an FSR of 1 would allow, or an FSR of 2. But the misleading inference instead is that staff are being remarkably conservative and careful when they are actually being incredibly generous at the expense of the neighborhood and the as yet to be completed secondary plan. And it is just not enough for staff to state that they are, quote, of the opinion the intent of the new secondary designation is being achieved, which is on page 1-8. That is actually not true. Going to an FSR of 3.5, 75% above what the secondary plan may allow is not achieving the intent of the secondary plan's possible revisions. It amounts to ignoring and dispensing with the secondary plan completely. And it is not enough on page 1-24 to say, quote, the subject development has been designed in such a way that it is appropriate for the subject lands. My view is, since when, under planning principles, has a building's designed trumped all other considerations, especially that of mass and impact, as has been highlighted repeatedly tonight? The proposal is not appropriate just because it has a thoughtful design. And contrary to the next sentence on page 124, the proposal does not, quote, respond to the surrounding neighborhood if it contradicts the thrust and the intent of the secondary plan. It just doesn't do that. I do not think it is appropriate to jump from low density to high density just because a developer wants to make more money by building more units. I do not think it is appropriate to more than triple the FSR of a property that, through an extensive city secondary planning process, has had to date a maximum FSR of 1, and mask this huge unjustified leap through endless references to aspects of the proposal that have nothing to do with supporting the existing secondary plan or its anticipated revision. The arguments in favor of the proposal are almost all abstract and come from outside of the neighborhood. There is nothing intrinsic at all about putting up a massive 12-story building on this property. And what really bothers me as someone who worked for years on the Central Frederick secondary plan is that this report and its recommendations provide a template and a precedent for developers to run roughshod over all the low density designations in the other neighborhoods close to the downtown, which will have the obvious impact of destabilizing the low-rise residential character of these neighborhoods and trashing the secondary plans. We deserve better. My last point. I think it is awful that local citizens need to endlessly challenge city staff and developers in order to affirm and protect the nature of their neighborhoods from overdevelopment. What I would really like to see are documents that fundamentally respect the values of the existing homeowners and residents and begin with the premise, rather than finding umpteen convoluted policies from elsewhere to override neighborhood objections. it would be my view that those of us living near the downtown continue to be sadly mistaken in thinking that our neighborhoods, through our secondary plans and our city councilors, are being protected from massive and intrusive redevelopment. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, John. Question from Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, hi, John. Thank you very much for your comments. So in this particular case, I know you're concerned about setting a precedent, and I think you expressed that quite clearly. Would you think that the only acceptable way forward is for the developer to come back with a proposal that would meet the secondary plan guidelines?
Well, yes, essentially, Debbie, yes, because that's what the secondary plan is for. And the 2.0 that may be in the new secondary plan is supposed to be the maximum. So if a developer came and said, I want 2.1 or 2.2, I could kind of understand why you might make a slight adjustment. But to go from 2 to 3.5, which is almost double what this new secondary plan may include, and is 3.5 times what 1 is just an enormous jump. And it, I think, just destabilizes the whole neighborhood, and will do so elsewhere when it happens.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, John. Next up is Alfred Rempel.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Alfred, we can hear you. You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, so I have a statement that I wrote because I'm not a great public speaker, but in listening to the arguments, including the last one, I'm starting to wonder whether council could approve this without extreme prejudice towards the neighborhood. So I'm Alfred Rempel. Our family lives at 185 Benton Street. Been here about 20 years and grew up in Waterloo. I want to thank the planners and the developer for participating in this engagement process that was leading up to the application. I was part of the working group. I was going to start with just a quick little historical thing. Mill Street is a transit corridor at the historic center of Kitchener. Mill Street developed one what was a pre-settlement native trail that followed Schneider Creek to the Grand River. The Schneiders traveled this route to their new homestead. It was a passage from the earliest inland settlement in Upper Canada near Blair to Schneider Road, now Queen Street. Schneider Creek was home to at least 8 water-powered mills in the early 1800s. I'd like to start by referencing specific design goals within the city's planning documents. Related to Schneider Creek, there's a statement: new developments will respect and complement the desirable aspects of the established neighborhood character. And then in the same document next to Victoria Park, it says it will create and enhance key gateways to Victoria Park from the surrounding area. Low-rise developments outside of the Victoria Park area Heritage Conservation District boundary should reference and consider the Victoria Park Area Heritage Conservation District plan, policies, and guidelines in order to encourage building design which reflects the existing historic character of the neighborhood. In responding to the original proposal, a working group was formed. The working group was allowed input into where the pieces would go, but not the size of the pieces that we were moving around. The design changes resulting from the working group involved the restacking of the blocks within a fixed volume of 176 units. And tonight we're finding out there's 180. I'm assuming those are the 4 affordable housing units. The restacking the blocks reduced the impacts related to 45 Mill Street as well as the view from the street. While these are positive changes, when you squeeze the sides of the development site, the tower goes higher. And that's what happened. The Heritage Impact Assessment and staff report suggest that a change in zoning from low-rise to high-rise commercial zoning will have no negative impacts on these heritage neighborhoods. The present zoning of low density commercial residential permits a floor space ratio of 1. These are been stated earlier in a 6-story development. The proposed zoning FR8 allows for an F floor space ratio of 3.5, maximum of 12 stories, as described in the staff report, which will provide a new feature on the city's skyline. So far, the heritage neighborhood provides no features on the city's skyline. And that's a character of the neighborhood, a characteristic. City of Kitchener official plan is created through extensive community engagement. This zone change application does not recognize the community involvement that formed the official and secondary plans. This was pointed out by several speakers before me, that what is the rationale for actually amending a zoning secondary and official plan that included participation of the neighborhood, and with the trust that these are actually worthwhile documents. What is the purpose of these documents if they have no purpose at all? As a neighbor, I believe that the height and density of the development is inappropriate to the site. It will change what the neighborhood feels like. What the neighborhood feels like is the character of the neighborhood. The zone change application has aspects contrary to the area specific guidelines outlined in city planning documents and will impact the character of this neighborhood. I am asking council to balance the interests of development with the impacts on the character of the neighborhood. And I also would not support this development.
Okay, thank you, Alfred. A question from Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, Alfred, thank you for coming in. You mentioned the historical value of Mill Street. And my question to you would be, what could the city do to honor that historical value?
To me, it's part of like kind of a continuation of the neighborhood itself, like the recognizing the history and the Schneider House is kind of the homestead of the 466 acres that encompass the Schneider family. I off the top of my head, I just don't have an easy response to that. I'm not sure. I mean, we have historical markers that sometimes will designate and recognize certain features. We have a couple for our neighborhood. Something like that might be somewhere to start.
Okay, it was interesting that you brought that history up, and I think it's important history, and thank you for bringing it to our attention. And thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred, once more. Next is Hal Yeager.
Greeting, Chair Singh, Mayor, and councillors. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, Hal, welcome. We can hear you. And once more, you have 5 minutes. And please be mindful of the points already made from previous delegations, and I try not to repeat.
Thank you. My name is Hal Yeager. Thank you for affording me this opportunity to share my thoughts. I do not live in the Cedar Hill Schneider Creek neighborhood, but I wish to add my voice to the list of those calling on council to reject the current zone change amendment application. I limit myself this evening to identifying one substantial omission in the set of facts considered by the staff report informing its recommendation to council, and one more general request. The omission lies in the angular plane analysis. The angular plane study on page 18 of the Scoped Heritage Impact Assessment, updated on September 9th, 2020, considers the neighbor at 45 Mill Street and the pedestrian realms along Mill Street and the Iron Horse Trail. It does not consider the transition from the perspective of adjacent neighbors at 15 Mill Street and 561, 551, and 541 Queen Street South. Upon my inquiry, staff responded that the applicant had not provided further information and asked the applicant to do so. As of this meeting, I have yet to see the analysis. We, the public, have not been able to see the proposed transition in height. More worrisome, we cannot be assured that the staff report has considered the transition in forming its recommendation to council. I ask that the matter be rectified before council considers this application further. On a more general level, I ask that council please enact a moratorium on zone change amendment applications in areas subject to a secondary plan until after the new secondary plans are completed. At present, the community cannot witness justice being done while our laws are in such a state of flux. And development review staff are not provided the firm legal footing they deserve in interacting on the city's behalf. I suggest that property owners' rights would not be unduly compromised, as they would be afforded the opportunity to make their requests for changes via the secondary plan review process. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Hal, for being succinct. Question from Councillor Chapman.
Yes, thank you, Hal. And thank you for your written submission as well. Can you explain, I mean, you talk about the plane analysis, right? What would change on the build site itself if a proper plan analysis was done on the northwest side of the building of the site? So that's where 15 Mill Street is. So if a proper plan analysis were done on that side, as you describe it, how might the site itself vary? What modifications could we expect?
Sure. I think what would happen is we may well find that there is a problem in transition, and how that would be then dealt with is another question. And I would prefer to leave that to the locals in conjunction with the planning staff and the developer. But it would certainly very likely reveal a very steep angle of ascent, one that probably is insupportable.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments.
All right, next up we have former Councillor Frank Etherington. It's been a while. Welcome, Frank. You have, as you probably know, 5 minutes to make a delegation.
Yep. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, councillors and planning staff. I can't say I've missed you, but my thanks to fellow residents who invest so much time and care in their neighborhoods. I think it's important to make that thank you. Those people are repeatedly encouraged to get involved in their communities, only to watch council and committees often disregard their research and opinions. You'll be delighted to hear that I'm going to keep this short because, like others living in those older communities, I've become very jaded. I've made the same arguments numerous times to a local government that, in my opinion, is often hypocritical, putting development interests and profits way ahead of residential priorities. So I'll limit it. My first point is to the ever-increasing need for affordable housing. This Mill Street proposal, in my opinion, is being rammed through at a time we have thousands of families and seniors unable to find or afford low-cost rental units in Kitchener. The type of accommodation currently provided for the tenants in these 12 units at the Mill Street houses. Now, to add insult to injury, the developer is offering to provide a pittance of 5 affordable units. That's 5 out of 180 that form this development. That's less than 3% of units at a time when various levels of government, including Kitchener, are spouting empty promises of the day when developers will be required to provide up to 30% of any development proposal in order to meet the desperate need for low-cost homes. My second point involves the protection and preservation of housing in our older established neighborhoods. Councillors and planners talk a great line about preservation of older homes, but faced with any possibility of development, they approve projects, in my opinion, in the name of profit. This particular development will do immeasurable damage to the older Mill Cortland Woodside community, to the neighboring Victoria Park heritage area, and the adjacent Iron Horse Trail. Now, to me, it's unbelievable that any self-respecting planner or councillor would insist that this development is compatible, that's the word they use, with surrounding neighborhoods. It is not and never will be compatible. It will, however, be compatible with the tightening noose of new condos currently strangling older downtown communities like Victoria Park, Mill Cortland, and others. And you know, it's so ironic that as council scrambles to approve this type of project, councillors and planners and staff, other staff, have the absolute gall to promote a program urging residents to, quote, love my hood. Incredible. I would ask that councillors and planners take more time to delay and reconsider their support or approval for this terrible development. Thank you.
Frank, you have a question from Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, hi, Frank. Thanks a lot for coming in. So my question, well, first I want to thank you for coming in and thank you for reminding us of the region's, I don't know if it's an announcement or push to have 30% of affordable housing units in all new buildings. I mean, as you point out, less than 3% in this build is a long way away from that 30%. But what would you consider affordable? I know you were active in getting some affordable housing units in the Drulo build. So what would you consider affordable for, let's say, I think they're talking one bedroom units and or 2-bedroom units?
I'm no expert on rental payments, but I would think nothing has changed in way of 30% of overall income. 30% is a maximum, and that anyone paying more than that is in financial trouble. That's all I know. And I don't see that applying to any of the units in this building. And I also wonder how the developer, council, whether it's region or local, how you would ever police a system where the developer provides a small number of affordable homes. This has happened at the Drullo building at the other end of town. And I haven't heard anything in the last year or so about those affordable units. I don't know how you could possibly insist that the rents stay at a level people could afford. I presume that information is available, but I don't have it.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Have a good evening.
Frank, there's no other questions from the committee, but I do have a couple. And you'll probably recall many years ago in 2014, when we were sitting together, we initiated a conversation regarding affordable housing. It was something important to the both of us, and I appreciate the championing that you placed in progressing that conversation with city staff. Now, affordability also has context to supply, that too with purpose-built apartment units as well. Not to say necessarily that the Pupila Corp has intentions for this development to be rental focused, but again, any new supply in the core does help towards the affordability. Do you see any type of development here that would still appeal to those points above the low rise, or do you see just anything above the low rise residential that exists now that's completely off base?
First of all, Paul, I don't see in any world, I don't see a developer interested in making a profit getting into the affordable housing field. I think that type of housing has to be provided by groups intent on meeting that need, and groups like Kitchener Housing at the city. And I throw back at you your question. I remember vividly the city finally promising to get into affordable housing. And I would ask you, what has happened since then? What has been provided by the city or by the region? A lot of talk, no action.
Well, we're trying to endeavor to do more, but that's another discussion. I would love to chat with you, or over a coffee one day. But thank you, Frank, for your comments. And you may not miss us, but we do certainly miss you. Thank you.
You're going to buy the coffees, Paul.
Certainly, no problem. Take care, Frank.
Take care.
Next, we have Mario Madu. Madam Clerk, is Mario with us?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Mario, you have 5
lost-
minutes. We hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, I lost your screen, sorry.
No problem. We
Can
hear
you
you.
hear Are we good? Can you hear me?
Yes, of course. We hear you.
Okay.
Go ahead when you're ready. You have
Thank
5
you.
minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councilors and staff, for having me. I'll be very brief. My esteemed colleagues have, because of the working group, have mentioned quite a few important things. I just want you to know that my wife, Debbie Westman, and I own 45 Mill Street. And our concern is the size, of course. We're not happy with it. But one of the things that I did want to touch upon, and Mr. Pupilo Sr. and Joseph Pupilo, we have talked about this last year, is flooding. Both properties are sitting on the floodplain. We know that. The drawings are specific. You can see those. One of the things that has not been mentioned is groundwater movement. So I have been told, yes, their engineers will be on top of it and we'll have drawings and plans and all that. But they don't live here. Our house is a rubble stone foundation. I have some pumps in the basement. And it's a heritage house that Debbie and I have been maintaining. And yes, we get flooding. However, we are taking care of it and we're okay with it. When you put in a big plug of a building into the ground next to us, I know that the groundwater will be shifted and I know the groundwater will be aimed at our house. What I haven't seen is any kind of remedial program from the organization called Polarcorp. I know that they may come up with something like this, but they don't understand what's on the ground here. There is a river that we're on, and the river flows from the Iron Horse Trail to Schneider Creek, and it flows all the time, and we have to deal with it. So my concern is I need to know and I need to see detailed remediation before this thing goes forward, because I tell you, this situation here is very, very different from what you see anywhere else. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mario. There is a question from Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, Mario, thank you so much for coming in. And I know this problem with the flooding in the groundwater is very dear to you and the heritage home that you live in. So do you think that if we were to ask for a deferral or a delay, do you think that this sort of thing could be resolved?
Of course, I think that it's resolvable for sure. My plan or my idea would be to put a drainage pipe all the way along between both properties and hooked up into the drainage system on the street. I think that would work, but I would need to talk to the specialists involved. And so, yeah, I think it can work, but I just think we're hurried. I don't see a plan. And I know they're going to say that this will happen in the next stage. But in our discussions, it's always about surface water. And I don't think they get it. We got groundwater issues here. And that's my point.
Okay, and just one final question on this. Have you brought this up with them?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so and your suggestion of what a possible fix might be, of course, as you say, it would have to be verified, but.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks a lot, Mario.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. Next, we have Mario Chelensky.
Hi, Mario. Yes, hi. Sorry, the thing went a little odd there. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Most of the points have been already covered, but there is one thing that was mentioned just briefly, and that is the floodplain. The people who bought this property fully aware of the fact they were building or proposing to build on a floodplain when they bought it. It was obviously purchased for development, and that's what they're trying to do, but it was a floodplain. When I was in an engineering situation, the customer, the client, whatever it happened to be, would always give us the spec, the scope, or whatever we had to do, and the regulations, rules, and requirements that we had to meet ignoring those was not an option. So I don't understand why it is that we are not enforcing those rules. People are not a little bit dead; they're dead. If the zoning says something, then we should be following this. Otherwise, what's the point in all this work you've been doing for years, working with the communities and the various people inside them? The parking should be put underground. If they can't do it, that's their problem, not ours. They bought the land. They knew what the land contained. They knew it contained a floodplain. If they have to do it, they should put the parking below. Secondly, this thing is about profit, not the community. So the height situation and everything else like that, every other developer is going to point to that saying, if they can do it, I can do it. You have a responsibility not only to grow this city, but also maintain the character and soul of this city. And this isn't going to do it. And Mr. Mayor, you sat in that movie Push, and you're fully aware of what the consequences were of unbridled development. So I suggest you perhaps give a copy of that you can see on TVO to the rest of the councillors, and they can watch it and learn. But we have rules and we have zones and we have height restrictions and things like that for a reason. They were meant to try and preserve the character and soul of this city. I'm urging you to start looking at that. Thank you very much.
All right, Mario, question from Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, Mario, thank you for your comments and for being brief. You mentioned the parking and that it's on a floodplain, but it can be below ground. Can you just explain that a bit better? Because first of all, I'm not sure it's a floodplain or a flood fringe, and I know there are different things, but can it actually be put below ground? I mean, can it?
There's a building in New York City. I went there for a architectural tour. I was invited, and one of the engineers in New York went through a building which is on 21 Park Place. It's an engineering wonder. Pissed off the neighborhood and everything else like that, but it's an engineering wonder because this thing's only 15 feet high, 15 feet wide, and 23 stories tall, and 19 million gallons of water run underneath it and has underground parking. 19 million gallons of water every single day. And they managed to do that. This parking lot is part of the bulk of this building. It's above ground. My suggestion is that they knew what they were buying. They follow the rules, put the parking underground. Preserve the heritage, put more green space out, make it more approachable. Bring it down in height. It's nothing more than a profit situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you, Mario. And that brings us to the conclusion for our delegations. Now we can focus on committees' questions of staff. Councillor Chapman, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the question I just asked Mario, and that is, can the parking be put underground? Is there any reason why it can't be? I mean, yes, we could, maybe it's very expensive, but is it possible to put it underground? And I think if I'm not mistaken, as I was reading the report, I heard that it wasn't on the floodplain, which, so I'm a bit confused about where it's actually, where the property is actually situated and what could potentially be done on that property.
Through the chair, I'm probably not the best person to ask that question. It would probably be better to be directed to the applicant. Obviously, they have done their analysis to see if it's feasible or not. There are costs associated for sure with going underground there. Whether that's feasible or not, I can't say for sure. I don't know if any of our other staff would want to weigh in on that as well. That would be appreciated.
I don't see anyone else. I don't know if Joseph Pupulo, you can answer on it. I don't want to disregard Councillor Chapman's question. If staff are not able to answer on your consideration, perhaps if you can.
I'll just add, like on page 1.5, it says the subject lands are located outside of the floodplain associated with Schneider's Creek. So, and this came up in different parts in the report. So like I said, I'm a bit confused about that. I mean, if there's no response right now, then I guess we'll have to wait. I don't know. I have other questions, but I guess when appropriate, I'd like to bring a motion forward.
Sarah, can you activate Joseph Puplo's
through the chair?
participant? So
I have tried to promote him to a panelist so that he can respond to your questions, but I'm just not quite seeing where he's gotten to. So I'm hopeful that he will shortly rejoin the meeting as a panelist.
Again, there is Matthew Worsich, who's the project manager, perhaps if.
I'll promote him as well.
Yeah. Or even David Butler, who's the consulting urban planner.
Excuse me, technical difficulties, moved over to another computer, so I would be able to further answer that question. So just as a further technical clarification, these lands, only a part of the lands are on the front flood fringe. They are not on the flood plain. Regarding the questions raised by 45 Mill Street, there had been detailed engineering already completed as part of this application, and that formed the basis of creating a complete application. The GRCA has commented on that as per my previous comments on pages 74 and 75 regarding their comments in the appropriateness in the area. Regarding the underground question, we reviewed it, and based upon our technical staff, their recommendation was as we presented in our application. I hope that clarifies the question.
Yeah, another question I have while I've got you here is this angular plane analysis that one of the delegates was referring to. On the west side, west-north side, I'm not sure on the direction, but on the 45 Mill Street side, the angular plane analysis went from the edge of the property up to the height of the building, whereas on the west side, it goes from, I think, the middle of Queen Street and is angled up. So is there consideration to do that angular plane analysis?
As part of our application, and I will also defer to Brian Bateman at the end of my answer, as per our application, we were required to do the angular plane analysis from the Victoria Park Heritage area as well as the designated house. The existing houses that are surrounded it are as of right CR1 with a maximum height zoning of up to six stories. So that's already existing as of right zoning. I'll defer to Brian Bateman regarding the specific requirement for our application.
Through the chair, I mean, I can confirm that's been submitted and it's been reviewed by our urban design staff and our heritage staff, and they concur with the recommendations. If you'd like more information on that, either Sandra Bassanese or Victoria Groen can provide further details.
Okay, I see other people have questions, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman. Just for clarity though, Matthew, isn't some or a lot of parking underground? Maybe I misread the report.
Sorry, this is Joseph Pupolo sitting in Matthew's spot. There is a floor of parking that goes underground and then it continues upwards. Correct.
Okay. All right. Just so we wanted to make sure that we have that clarity that there is some parking underground already.
That is correct.
We have Councillor Johnston.
Yes, thank you. And through the chair, I'm wondering if staff can tell us if you ever received drawings from the developer that were within the actual zoning.
Mr. Beaton.
Through the chair, I just want clarification. Are you asking for if drawings were submitted that meet the actual zoning?
Yes,
Okay. Not that I'm aware of.
thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Next, Councillor, sorry, not Councillor, but Mayor Vivanovic.
Thank you very much, Chair Singh. Mr. Pupolo, just want to follow up on some of the comments of some of the delegations, in particular, Ms. Peller and Ms. Westman, Mr. Mado, who were all part of the working groups. And I was in particularly, I was compelled by the comments of Ms. Peller, who, as you know, stood before council together with you after a previous development, after you yourselves as the applicant and the neighborhood worked through the issues with respect to the property on Queen Street that you developed. And it was really sort of touted as an example of a perfect scenario where community and development come together. I'm wondering if you can speak to the fact that they feel that certainly some progress was made, but that there's room for some additional dialogue to work towards the kind of outcome perhaps that we saw previously. I guess what would your response be to that? And what's different in this instance that might be preventing that from happening?
Through the chair, thank you, Mayor Vrbanovic. Just regarding that, we did our best to try and manage a number of different requests from a number of different areas, whether it be the residents of 45 Mill, whether it be the residents of the greater Schneider community area, and we did our best to balance that. We are always open for more dialogue. Frankly, we've reached out consistently beyond the working group sessions to the neighbors and all the members of the working group, and I think all of the members of the working group will affirm that. Again, trying to manage multiple different things in order to deliver a project that works within the context and also meets all the requirements, both provincially, locally, urban design guidelines. That is the challenge that we'd faced, and we attempted to put our best foot forward with our proposal that's before you today.
Okay, so I guess as a follow-up to that, and if I heard you correctly, there continues to be an openness and a willingness to have some further dialogue. Would you in fact be open to some additional time for that dialogue to occur, as long as it's a reasonable amount of time and isn't protracting the decision process indefinitely?
Through the chair, Mayor Vrbanovic, we would welcome that. There has been a number of requests made by specifically Jane Peller in the discussion. I think there is some answers that we could provide that would provide further understanding and surety in terms of the building and the quality and the materials and the articulation. Whether our ability to deliver, as some people have requested, fully rendered and completed site drawings, as per our discussion with staff, that's not required at this stage of the development. So I think we can answer some additional questions. Whether we could provide them everything that's requested is another matter.
Okay, so what in that regard, from your perspective, and your perspective versus the neighborhood's perspective versus staff's perspective may all be different. From your perspective, what would a reasonable period of time be for discussions like that to occur?
I think that could occur within a month time frame, and we could see what we could do within that period of time. And see what modifications could be made or further assurances on some of the points raised. I'll give an example. In the case of 45 Mill, we had a direct discussion with Mario regarding the engineering and the site conditions there. We've already provided very specific assurances that we've done so, and it's also reflected in our staff report, and it's also in the engineering documents that we submitted. But we can provide further clarity and assurances on some of those outstanding points to address any outstanding concerns on that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I'm certainly encouraged by that. Those are all the questions I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Marsh?
Thanks. I have a few questions. Well, I'm encouraged, first of all, Mr. Pupolo, for when I hear you willing to open up to more dialogue, and so we have been inundated with many emails about various specific requests that some of the neighbors have asked for, and so. I guess what I want to know is when you said that the engineer's report was already outlined and it's in the report, can you just tell me, does it address the problem of the groundwater flow as well as the surface water?
It does specifically address that, but also, sorry, through the chair, through staff as well. I mean, that was a requirement of our application for our application to be deemed complete. And we also had to go through an interagency process where external parties such as the GRCA had to review that. So they reviewed our baseline engineering requirements, included looking at the groundwater and above ground flow. But okay. Specifically speaking, at site plan, that a lot of additional detail will be provided.
Oh, okay. Sorry, you're saying I was trying to cut you off because I know I'm on a timer, but you're saying that some of the details have been worked out and shared, but additional details will be added at site plan approval stages.
Correct, as per GRCA's report.
Okay. Thanks. I wanted to know, what about in the time, if we can extend the timeline a little bit between now and the time that this comes back for a final decision, would you be able to provide us with details about your plans for the additional supports for people who will be displaced, and also for the 5 units that you're planning to include as affordable? Can you just, would you be willing to share those details with us?
Through the chair, we provided those with a detailed letter to staff, and staff can share those, or we can provide them, either or.
Great. Okay. I have a few questions of staff. Mr. Chair, do you want me to cue back in? I can't hear you, sorry.
Go ahead, Councillor Chapman. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Councillor Marsh. Councillor Chapman's after you and she's spoken, so if you have more questions.
Okay, so Mr. Bateman, can you help us understand why you're recommending this project when the parts plan for the central parts plan documents and the secondary plan that's been contemplated has an FSR of 2 recommended and a building height maximum of 8. I guess what I'm trying to get at, because I know you've said that it's in the MTSA boundary, but what I'm trying to get at is, why would it be that an FSR allotment gets to increase just because the floodplain prevents lower levels of parking?
Through the chair, I think there are a couple of different reasons why. I mean, certainly the size of the property can dictate an increase in the FSR for sure. Obviously, to the, and as you've alluded to already, the MTSA policies support increased densities, and at this location, we feel that given contextual reasons and other factors that it's appropriate to increase the FSR.
Mhm. Okay, and
I think what the design really responds, in our opinion, to what's around it.
and so, you know, with a big building with a huge footprint like this, given the actual green space surrounding it, which is kind of minimal, where will the people who live there, you know, throw a frisbee or kick a soccer ball, or, you know, do they have to go all the way to Victoria Park to do that? Or can you help me understand where's the green amenity space?
It'd be a question for Mr. Puplo to respond as well, but my understanding is we're going to be providing some rooftop amenity as well, but it is in, like you said, it is in close proximity to Victoria Park. So, I mean, it's a simple hop on the Iron Horse Trail and walk to the park if you need be. And there's also a park just down the road that the name the name eludes me right now, just on the other side of the tracks.
The Mike Wagner Park.
Okay.
Brian, Matthew has his hand up. I'm not sure if he wants to add anything. Go ahead.
Sorry, to answer specifically, this is Joseph through the chair. There are rooftop amenities all on this property, so allow for the residents of this property. There is access onto the Iron Horse Trail with bike amenities within the building that allow people to access Victoria Park. It is immediate proximity to Wagner Green and already existing park plus Victoria Park, so it's well situated in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Joseph. You can't blame me calling from Matthew's line, so it keeps throwing me off. So
I will defer to the next person. I might cue back in.
Thank you, Councillor Marsh. Next up, Councillor Chapman.
Actually, mine is just a comment and then a motion. So if Councillor Marsh wants to go ahead with further questions, I can hold off.
Councillor Marsh, do you have more questions? No, she's good. Councillor Chapman, you go ahead with your comments.
Okay, so I really want to begin by thanking staff and Polo Court for the work that they've put into this file. And a very special thank you goes also to the residents who have put in hours of thought and time to come up with suggestions and proposals to make this site community friendly. I've learned a lot from all of you. There's been a tsunami of new development in Ward 9 over the past 2 years, and the feedback I have received regarding this site has been extraordinary. So really, I thank you all. I've watched and participated in the process with both optimism and dismay. First, the dismay. What makes this different from most development projects of this size is that it is plunk in the middle of an established neighborhood. It is like cutting a piece out of the puzzle and placing it with something incompatible. Sorry, replacing it with something incompatible. Something that doesn't fit, something that displaces people, and something that tears away history. The fear I have of approving this proposed development is that it sets a precedent for future developments in established neighborhoods around the city. From the number of submissions by people outside this neighborhood, it is clear that I am not alone on this with this apprehension. The delegations here tonight and the written submissions we have received have done a great job of detailing all the problems. I couldn't possibly do as good a job as they have done. I take their comments very seriously, and for this reason, I am unable to support the proposal. Staff, as we were reminded repeatedly, put a lot of work into the proposed new zoning bylaw, the secondary plans, and the urban design manual. I participated in many of the public engagement events that were organized to get public feedback for each site and each area. I was amazed at the response and the thoughtful ideas that came out of this process. So now here we are. We have a site that is currently zoned CR1, which would allow for an FSR of 1, approximately 6 stories. The secondary plan proposes an FSR of 2, which would allow for approximately 8 stories. Like other secondary plans in the city, this one was carefully crafted to reflect the need for intensification and growth while protecting the characteristics of the neighborhood. However, the developer that owns the land decides that they can squeeze an FSR of 3.5 onto the site, including 3 towers, one of which is 12 stories in height. This just sounds wrong to me. This piece does not fit into the puzzle. It does not fit into staff's original vision for this area, nor does it fit into the established neighborhood in question. Delegations have raised a house full of concerns that the committee and council need to consider, such as setbacks, transitions, stepbacks, drainage, heritage, cultural heritage landscapes, density, loss of affordable housing, displacement of people, size of units, that is 1 or 2 bedrooms, not necessarily good for families, traffic increase in an established neighborhood, loss of mature trees, vegetation, and green space. There may be additional concerns that I've missed, but these are the ones that come to mind. What makes me optimistic are 2 things. One is the fact that the working group is willing and happy to sit down with the developer and staff to continue the discussion. The second is, I guess there are 3, because I was also encouraged to hear Joseph Pupolo say that he'd be willing to carry on the dialogue as well. The third item is that there is a successful precedent for this approach. And that was thanks to the formation of a working group and negotiation, a Strasbourg Road development that we heard about at the Committee and Infrastructure Services Committee meeting this morning, started out as a proposal to build 3 15-story towers with 500 units. It was then reduced to 2 12-story buildings with 288 units, and finally reduced to stacked townhouses with 200 units. All of these things give me great optimism. And it's due to this optimism that I would like to bring a motion forward asking for a deferral, a 1-month deferral for this application until further consultation and discussion has occurred. And I do believe that we can get this right for the benefit of all parties. Thank you.
Do you want this to come back to committee again or to council then?
I don't know what's most appropriate.
I'll look to staff to see.
I guess committee.
Just trying to see a date. Do you have a date in mind? You said a month from now. Is there a specific date?
No, I said a month because Joseph Pupolo, Mr. Pupolo, suggested that would be sufficient time to work through these things. So I don't have a calendar in front of
So in
me.
our schedule, it says March the 8th. There's a standing committee. So that's the committee day.
That I'm okay with that, but
okay. And the Madam Chair can correct us if you're wrong on that. All right, so there is a motion for a deferral from 1 month to March the 8th. I'll take comments related to the deferral. Mayor Vivenovic, go ahead.
Well, thank you, and I certainly can support the deferral that's before us. I too want to thank all of the delegations who I know have been engaged in this issue for some time, as well as the neighborhood, the working group, our staff, the developer and his team, who have gotten the application to this point. It's clear that there are, a number of issues that still are, I think need some working out. I'm not sure that, that at the end of the day, we'll be able to resolve all of the issues that were raised this evening, but I think there seems to be an openness and a willingness to explore a number of them, and I'm hopeful that through the kind of goodwill and precedent that we saw with the Barrett Castle development, we may be able to see a similar result, certainly for the immediate neighborhood, and ideally beyond by the time this comes back. With it coming back to committee as well on the 8th, it also gives us a little bit more room if it's necessary then between the 8th and council ultimately on the 22nd for any final tweaking if that becomes necessary. But ideally, many of the issues will have been worked out by the time this comes back. I guess the only thing we haven't heard is from staff as to whether or not that date's workable. And I am cognizant that we are still under a bit different times, not a bit, very different times because of the pandemic. And so I'm just wondering if we can get some feedback either from Mr. Bateman or Ms. Bustamante as to if that's doable timing.
Mr. Bateman, do you have any issue with the timing of the 8th of March?
No, I think we could work with that. I mean, it's going to be a quick turnaround for sure. I'm just curious as to who would facilitate this, if I can ask a question through the chair on that. I think it would be helpful to have someone help facilitate to keep this moving along.
The deferral movement is from Councillor Chapman. So Councillor Chapman, do you have anything particular in mind?
Well, the previous meetings we had 2, maybe 3 staff people. The developer was often there. The team of developers were there, and the residents. So staff that led the meetings, and it worked quite well.
And there's a working group that was already established, so I'm assuming they can be touched upon.
I
provide more input.
They would be the residents.
Right.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Bateman?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, Councillor Singh, I see Mr. Reedman jumped in, which suggests maybe there's some words of wisdom to come from that direction as well. So just before I close out.
Go ahead, Mr. Reedman.
So the only thing I do want to flag is the timing for publication of the report, given that it's usually about a week and a half in advance of the committee meeting. So there is a report in front of council, and so we may not be able to meet the full requirements. So maybe a late addition report based on the fact that we would need to meet with a working group, have the applicant potentially revise their design, and then get a staff report back in front of council. So I do want to just flag that notice may be a little bit shorter on a report based on that cycle, based on the steps involved.
And I think that should be okay. We've had a lengthy discussion and quite a bit of input from the residents already. So we know what the issues are, and it's a matter of trying to find that happy medium and balance.
So with all of that, Councillor Singh, I'm certainly very, very supportive and encouraged. And I think if folks can, roll up their sleeves and get their Zoom links going, hopefully we can see some productive recommendations coming forward on March the 8th.
Thank you, Mayor. Next up, we have Councillor Schneider.
Sorry, there we go. It's finally unmuted. I will support the deferral. One of the best nights I think we ever had at council was when the original agreement was met between the Pupelos and the neighborhood group with Queen Street, and I think we can do that again. I just want to make clear though that we're in a situation where we have a transit system built. We have amenities nearby. We have a trail nearby. We can argue and discuss about the density of this project, but we do need to intensify. We want to do that responsibly. So I just want to make sure that as we enter these further discussions that both sides have manageable expectations as to what can be done. And I'm just going to be optimistic, as I always am, and believe the best will come out of this.
Thank you. Sound recommendation on that. Next, we have Councillor Gazzola.
Yes, I'm really encouraged by public engagement. That's something we talk about all the time, and we saw an excellent example of it tonight. There is a community there that is very engaged and very interested not only in their community but the entire city, and I can really buy into that, and I'm very supportive of it. As it sits right now, the community is very clear in the fact that, as one delegate said, this is not in keeping with the development of their neighborhood. And I know if I lived in that neighborhood and all of a sudden I saw a building of such huge size and scale, I would not be happy and would really be asking a lot of questions. So I'm totally in support of a deferral on this, even if it takes longer. I think we have to work this out so the developer is entitled to a profit, but also the community is entitled to maintain their community. I think, and I think one of the last speakers really made a point that hit home with me, and it's a point that we seem to forget too often. And that point was that we not only have the responsibility to grow the city, but also to maintain the character of the city. And I think we spend too much of our time being interested in growing our city so that we can get closer and closer to Toronto. But in so doing that, we lose the character of our neighborhoods. So I think we can move a little slower on this, and the sun will still come up in the morning. So I'm totally in support of the deferral. Thank you.
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. Yeah, I am totally also in support of the deferral. I fully agree with Councillor Gazzola on that point. There were so many amazing speakers tonight, so many articulate speakers, passionate about the topics that they brought forward, and I just want to highlight a couple. One is that low-rise neighborhoods need to be protected, even in the major transit station areas. We have our secondary plans that are being developed for a reason, and that is because we have put the LRT, the royal the community has the LRT route that goes smack dab through the middle of a bunch of very established low-rise residential neighborhoods. And so there is a conflict there that we need to grapple with. And 12 stories with a huge footprint that expands well beyond 50% of the footprint of the actual property is not an appropriate use in a low-rise residential neighborhood, in my opinion. And so I would encourage the working group to really try to, and especially the Policor development group, to consider reducing the floor space ratio, just so that we can come to an agreement that and have a development that is fitting within the neighborhood context. That's something that I look forward to hopefully seeing when we come back.
All right. Mayor Refinements, you have your hand up still. Do you want to say anything more?
Yeah, Councillor Singh, if you can just indulge me for 30 seconds. There was a reference made to Toronto, and I do want to respond to it, only because I think it's important to say that in all my time sitting on council, I have yet to hear a single member of council ever say that they want to see this city grow to be like Toronto. I think what we have had many people say over time, and I think what we've strived for is to see this community continue to grow, to recognize that it has many big city amenities, but its strength actually comes from maintaining that smaller town feel. And that is something that I think we continue to strive for, both with our neighborhood strategy and in the work that we're doing. Are we changing? Are we growing? There's no question about it. That's happening everywhere. But I, for one, and I've, like I said, have yet to hear one member of council ever say they want to see this city become like Toronto.
All right. I don't see anyone else. I'll just quickly make a comment. I want to thank staff. This application obviously just didn't come to fruition. It took extensive work on working in the file, working with a neighborhood working group, with the applicant, and seeing what is the what staff can appropriately support. And to their credit, it's not necessarily what they they want on their own accord. A lot of times they are required to follow prescribed legislation from the province with the Places to Grow Act, with a certain expectation to allow a level of density that the higher orders of government want to see in communities such as ours. So they've looked at that, and that's how they came to their support of the application. We do need to continue to grow. We will, as a community, continue to change, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I think it's appropriate and always good for us to try to find the balance of things. And I think that's perhaps what's being recommended through this deferral, allowing the proponent, staff, and the neighborhood to have that conversation and everyone give a little, but at the same time for the positive aspect for our overall community, allowing not just for the preservation of the existing neighborhood, but also inclusivity of allowing new members to come into this neighborhood to enjoy the amenities that so many already are, and allowing that wider breadth and wider reach. So with that, I will call the vote. All those in favor for the deferral? And of course, that's approved unanimously. So this would be coming back to the standing committee on March the 8th. Wish everyone all the best. And that's it. Meeting adjourned.
So folks, as you know, we need to go back into caucus. So we'll use this time. It's 10:09 now. 6 minutes for a bio break and stretch. And stay on this line, and staff can disconnect from the public feed, and others can sign off, except for those who are staying for the caucus session.